Nathan Carman was the prime suspect in his grandfather's murder. However, he had not been charged in the 3 years that it took for his mother to then vanish as well while on a fishing trip with her son. Now, this case is quite controversial due to the fact that nobody really knows whether this boy had anything to do with either of the murders and what exactly happened to both of these family members. In fact, the family itself is divided on what they believe. But one of the main things in this case that causes a lot of conversation is the fact that Nathan was autistic. He had been diagnosed back when he was 5 with Asperger's, which is now just known as autism, and that has contributed to a lot of conversation around the fact that he was interrogated and it was believed to be strange the way he was answering questions. Did that relate to the fact that he is autistic? Or is this something that points to guilt? There are many pieces of evidence that I'm going to bring to you, as well as opinions versus facts, and I'm also going to be telling you a bit more about the case than what the Netflix documentary, The Carmen Family Deaths, was able to bring forward. There is a book that was created about this case. It covers a bit more of the possible suspects and the possible innocence of Nathan Carman. I will have everything linked down below, and of course I try to come at these cases with a very unbiased opinion and kind of just lay out all of the facts for you. So that's why I decided to take both of these mediums and combine them, research both of them to give you this full outlook on this case, and I would love to hear your opinions down below. But I did want to start this off by saying that we are not villainizing mental health or autism or any sort of disorder in this case or ever on this channel, but it is something that we need to address in this case. So this is what Netflix did not tell you about Nathan Carman, his family, and the truth behind their multiple deaths. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Mckenna. I am so grateful that you are here. On this channel, we focus on the victims and the survivors over the killers and the perpetrators. That is what we are passionate about. That is my mission here. So if that is something you are also passionate about, I would love if you would subscribe and go binge a whole bunch of videos. There's going to be some exciting news coming up regarding that. If you're interested in learning more, keep coming back in the new year, and I am just really excited about the community that we're growing here. But first, a quick thank you to our sponsor, Ana Luisa. If you guys know me, you know I love Ana Luisa. I've been working with them for years, but I've been wearing them for even more. Ana Luisa has the best quality jewelry. If I am wearing jewelry, it's most likely from them because I can wear them 24/7. I literally never take my jewelry off, not when I shower, not when I work out. And Ana Luisa keeps the quality. It does not dip because it is water resistant, sweat proof, and tarnish proof. So the color keeps the shine and the look that I love. All of these earrings down here are from Ana Luisa. I will give you a little view of my collection of jewelry from them, but I seriously wear them for years at a time because they have the 2-year warranty. But right now, Ana Luisa is actually having the biggest sale of the year, up to 30% off for Black Friday, and if your cart hits $130, they will actually add a free piece of jewelry, which is so incredibly cool. There's nothing better than a free item. But I will say that bestsellers are going very fast, and some of my favorites are in the best-selling category, so go ahead and click that link down below and get some for yourself. Get some discounted holiday jewelry for yourself, or go ahead and get it as gifts for your family. And yes, I will be using my own discount code to purchase more because that's how much I love it. So thank you to Ana Luisa for continuously supporting this channel. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2016 in Rhode Island, and Linda Carman agreed to go out on a fishing trip with her 21-year-old son, Nathan. They were going to sail out on his boat, the Chicken Pox, out of Ram Point Marina and go ahead and go about 24 miles out to Block Canyon. They met up on Saturday, September 17th, Nathan was excited to go out on his 31-foot-long aluminum fishing boat. Nathan wanted to go later in the week, actually. However, his mother, Linda, did not want him going out alone, and she was often his fishing buddy. So she offered to go with him that weekend. Linda couldn't go during the week. She actually had a job working with special needs children at their homes. She was very passionate about this. She had raised her own son, Nathan, who had autism, and she had him diagnosed when he was about 4 or 5, and she was always looking for little ways to help him and things to learn about that would benefit Nathan. And so it was just something that she knew a lot about, and so she wanted to carry that on and help other children with that as well. So that just meant that she couldn't go during the week, and so they decided to go that weekend. And so Linda arrived at the marina, and she texted her best friend Sharon saying that she was there. She basically always gave her friends her location when they were going out fishing. She said that they were leaving that evening, but they would be back by 9 a.m. the next morning, and that she would call them by noon. So she also sent Sharon photos of the boat and the registration number just in case. And then Linda and Nathan departed from the marina around 11 p.m. that evening, and Linda texted her friends saying that they were headed out. But the evening faded into the next morning, and soon enough, noon arrived. Neither of her friends had gotten any sort of text from her. They texted, they called, they got no response, and they knew that this was strange. So by that evening, Sharon had actually called the police and then spoke to the U.S. Coast Guard to report the mother and son missing. So search and rescue controller, who was Rick Arsenault, jumped into action with his team, and they teamed up with Verizon Wireless, who was the phone carrier that Linda had, to analyze her phone records to hopefully figure out where they were actually located overnight. With these records, they were able to find that at 12:45, so just after midnight when they left, her phone pinged just on the south side of Block Island, so exactly where they said that they were going. So they would focus on this area and cover around 1,200 square nautical miles. For the next 6 hours, helicopters flew above the area searching for any sign of this boat. So they were looking and they were not finding anything, not any trace of evidence, which rescuers thought was odd because they were known to have the best operation in the world when it came to search and rescue, and they had not located even one thing by this point. During the search, 2 fishermen off Block Island did find a marine deck box cover, a pillowcase, an empty engine coolant container, but none of the debris was actually believed to be tied to the mother and son's boat. 7 days of searching, and neither the boat nor the mother and son had been located. They had not contacted anybody. They were still missing. Search and rescuers actually suspended the operation 6 days in, and they knew that something was wrong. It was as though this boat had vanished into thin air. There was no sign of engine failure or a crash or an accident of any kind. They had nowhere to search at this point. They had searched everywhere in this area. The investigation went on to land at this point, with Linda and Nathan's family being contacted, and Linda's sister Valerie began telling investigators the opposite of what they were expecting. You see, Valerie did not cry out for her sister, begging them to find her missing family members. She simply told them plainly that Nathan had a lot of reasons to kill his mother, including inheritance. In fact, what he stood to inherit was Linda's father's mansion in New Hampshire. So Nathan's grandfather, who was named John Cholakas, and there was a court settlement meeting scheduled for the following week where he could inherit $7 million. However, the main reason that this mansion was even being inherited at all was that Nathan's grandfather, John, had been murdered back in 2013, 3 years prior to this. Valerie stated that she believed Nathan had also killed his grandfather, John. While both Linda and Nathan were missing, investigators had no choice but to look at this from all angles, including a possible murder. So the Coast Guard began working with local law enforcement to impound Nathan's pickup truck as well as Linda's car. They also began tracking their credit cards in case Nathan did in fact kill his mother and tried to escape and in fact made it to land. Inside of Nathan's pickup truck, they actually found a bucket of eels, which was said to be bait for the striped bass, but it was odd that they had gone fishing and he left the bait behind. Investigators also learned at this point that his grandfather, John, had in fact been murdered, as Valerie had said. However, it remained unsolved. Investigators were able to locate the CCTV footage from the marina that Linda and Nathan had departed from. This was Ram Point Marina, where Nathan arrived a few hours earlier than his mother. And Nathan was actually seen working on his boat. He was speaking to a fellow boater that was at the marina, docked next to him. The two even shared lunch, and then of course, Linda came and they headed out. So this man was located and identified as Mike Iozzi. So Mike would tell investigators that Nathan was actually using an electric power drill to make holes, 4 of them in his boat, and then he removed the screws off the top of trim tabs in his boat. And these trim tabs were used to raise the windward side of the boat. Now, Mike said that Nathan appeared to know what he was doing, but Mike still asked him what he was doing because Nathan shouldn't have been taking the trim tabs off while he was in the water. That boat could actually sink. And so Mike was telling Nathan this, but Nathan just kind of ignored him and kept drilling. Mike then offered Nathan some meatballs and they ate lunch together, and he asked Nathan about his plans for fishing that day or going out on his boat. And Nathan said that he was going to go fishing out of Block Canyon. And Mike noticed that he didn't have any fishing poles in his boat, but he basically just told him, night fishing is dangerous, so be safe. And then he left Nathan alone. Investigators found that Nathan's boat, Chickenpox, had passed a safety inspection less than a month prior and a visual inspection at the marina 11 days prior by the marina technician. It was said to be in good condition. CCTV then showed Linda arriving and the two departing around 11 p.m. when Linda texted her friends. Linda didn't appear as though she was under any duress, and a witness came forward around this time after the news had broken of this missing boat, claiming that he had actually spotted the Chickenpox that evening. He was on his way back to Point Judith, and he said that Chickenpox was going about 20 miles per hour. They were headed south toward Block Island. And the witness specifically remembered this boat due to the fact that the lights on top of the cabin looked as though they were too close together. So he couldn't see anybody on board. But 2 days after the search was suspended on September 25th, the investigation continued on land. However, it would be back in the water that a lead would emerge. Because 100 miles off of Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, which was east of Block Island and Ram Point Marina, a Chinese cargo ship had actually left Boston. They were unaware of the search for this missing ship when they spotted what was an orange speck in the ocean. It was bobbing up and down in the waves, and the crew quickly realized that this was someone in a life raft that was waving a huge flag. They were asking for help. So they ended up getting as close as they could. They tossed a life ring at this person, and the person swam towards the boat. The waves were very tricky, and this person swimming was being swallowed by water, and then the life ring was being thrown back at him, and finally the life ring was placed over this person's head, and they were able to bring him in and get him to the boat. At this point, the rescued individual was given food, water, dry clothes. They were given their very own cabin, and the doctor was visiting immediately to give them any of the help that they needed because they had been stranded at sea, and who knew for how long. The man slept and appeared to be doing well physically, and sailors on board noticed that he appeared healthy. And so they were guessing that he had only been stranded for a matter of hours from what they had seen from other rescues. So the captain called the Coast Guard, and the person that had been rescued was actually able to speak to rescue controller Richard Arsenault the next day. And that's when they realized that this was the missing boy, 22-year-old Nathan Carman. Richard was surprised at how well he was doing. Nathan told everybody that he had been on this life raft for the past 7 days, and they expected his condition to be far worse after a week at sea. But Nathan appeared to be doing just fine. He spoke in a direct, matter-of-fact manner. He didn't appear disoriented, and he hadn't the entire time. The ship doctor found that his lips weren't even chapped or cracked, which is normal from the salt water, and he didn't appear to be dehydrated. The boat captain told the Coast Guard the next morning after Nathan's rescue that he had actually asked the captain how much distance was needed to see someone in the ocean, and he was told about 3 nautical miles. Nathan then walked to the deck and began looking out at the ocean, and the captain believed he was looking for his mother. He stayed there for the next 2 hours. Now, when the boat docked, Nathan was met by a bunch of reporters who wanted to get his side of the story, his survival story. But Nathan had told investigators bits of his miraculous survival story, and he said that he and his mother were fishing for tuna when the boat suddenly sank. He said that they spent about an hour fishing for stripers around 1 a.m., and then he was urging Linda to actually travel further south with him to hunt for tuna with the new gear that he had purchased. Now, Linda had already told him she didn't really want to go farther. She needed to be back in town. She wanted to meet her friend for a hike later that day. But Nathan was telling her the weather conditions were perfect and they really didn't even need life preservers. So he was able to persuade her into going further. So as they drifted further out to sea, he said that he noticed a noise in the engine and he didn't immediately know that there was a serious problem. He didn't think the boat was sinking, but it started to take on water fast. He said he rushed to the pilot house and he grabbed 3 packages of survival gear that he had packed and prepared the life raft. At the same time, he said that he didn't make a call for help because everything was happening so fast. He had told his mother to go grab fishing gear and pull it in, and he said that at that point the boat dropped out from under him and basically tumbled into the ocean, and he found himself clutching a bag of the survival gear. He searched the water. He did not see his mother anymore. He swam over to the life raft where he was blowing a distress whistle, but his mother still did not emerge. He said he heard nothing, but he saw debris where the boat had actually sunk and his mother had gone down with it. He said he then focused on himself and his own survival after that. But Nathan said after 7 days at sea, he had only seen one other ship in the distance before being rescued by this ship. He said that in his survival bag, he drank fresh water packets that he had and he rationed his food bars. He had also packed a device that allowed him to convert seawater to drinking water, which is why he said he wasn't dehydrated. When rescued, he actually wrote a note to the crew of the ship saying, "If my mom is lost, which I fear is likely, I will have no one on earth who will welcome me sincerely into their home. So I appreciate the efforts you and your crew have made to make your ship a home to me while I have been aboard." Now, his father, Clark, picked Nathan up when the boat had docked, and Nathan kept asking if anyone had found his mother. No one had, nor had they found the boat. However, Coast Guard officers were confused. They were claiming that where he was found in his life raft didn't actually make sense when it came to where he was saying the boat sank. They were saying that the currents would have pushed the raft in the opposite direction, yet he was found 35 miles east of where he should have been. The currents were flowing east to west, but he claimed he had been pushed west to east, according to his story. But Nathan spoke to reporters the day he arrived back home, telling them, "I feel healthy emotionally. I've been through a huge amount."
And I just want to thank the public for their prayers and for their continuing prayers for my mother.
And many were just in awe of this boy and his survival story. Everyone but his aunt, Valerie. Valerie believed not only was he capable of murder, but he was already a killer. You see, back on December 19th of 2013, 87-year-old John Cholakas was out at dinner at a Greek restaurant in Newington, Connecticut. John was a real estate developer and a millionaire. He was worth around $42 million at the time. He developed nursing homes and care facilities across New England, but he was also a grandpa. Nathan was 19 years old at the time, and he actually was the first grandson and the first male heir of John's, as he had had 4 daughters. That night, Nathan and his grandpa had gone out to dinner together, and afterwards Nathan drove him back home to his mansion in Nathan's pickup truck that John had actually purchased for him. John could no longer drive due to his eyesight, but Nathan really didn't mind. He was said to love his grandpa. They were always talking politics. His grandpa basically paid for everything, his truck, his apartment, his credit card, so he was in a great place. John had also just lost his wife, Rita, to cancer about a month prior to his murder, so he enjoyed the company. So they arrived back at John's home on Overlook Drive around 8:30 p.m. Nathan walked him inside and left shortly after. And it was found around this time John had received a phone call that lasted about 10 minutes. He then took 2 more calls that night, one from his daughter Linda, who was Nathan's mother, and another from the home's caretaker, who was named Joy Washburn. The next day, John's daughter Elaine, who was the eldest daughter, she was grown at this time as they all were, went to visit him to have breakfast the next morning. She arrived at the mansion around 8:15. She let herself inside, and when she called out for him, she heard nothing, which was strange for her early bird father. She couldn't locate him, so she headed to his bedroom, and as he was getting older, she feared that maybe he had passed away in his sleep. But when Elaine opened the door, she found that her father had been shot in his bed. Newington police arrived after Elaine's 911 call, and they quickly found that although it appeared as though a break-in had occurred, robbery was not the motive. There were stacks of cash left untouched all over. From the wound, detectives believed that the killer had stood at the foot of John's bed, and John had been shot by a rifle several times while he was asleep. He was shot once in the stomach, twice in the head, by what they believed to be a Sig Sauer rifle. It was believed this was around 3 a.m. Sergeant McKee was on the scene, and he believed it was obvious that the crime scene was staged. The glass door that led to the back of the property had been punched. That appeared to be forced entry, but it had been punched from the inside outwards. His daughters told the police that the motive could have something to do with the fact that John had these, million-dollar businesses, and his daughter Linda believed that maybe it had to do with the mob. Valerie was fearful that his daughters were going to be targeted over the money, as the money would then go to them. So detectives claimed that the entire family immediately lawyered up, but all 4 of his daughters took a polygraph test and passed. So when the investigation began, the last person seen with John was found to be Nathan Carman, the grandson. Nathan claimed that as soon as he dropped his grandfather off, a call came in and his grandpa sort of escorted him out of the front door, telling the caller that he was going to tell his grandson goodbye. He then hugged Nathan and closed the front door. Nathan said that he returned to his apartment that evening, and investigators found evidence that he was leaving that apartment complex around 2:45 a.m. He claimed he was leaving at that point to go to Glastonbury for a fishing trip with his mother, and then he basically was going to meet up with her, but he was a bit later than he said he was going to be. When they questioned him at this time, he immediately said that he was really emotional because his grandfather had his head blown off, but no one had told him the manner of death yet. He refused a polygraph, but they had no evidence that Nathan was responsible. He said he had no motive to kill his grandpa because his grandpa treated him as his son. However, his aunts, John's daughters, didn't agree with that. In fact, Charlene, one of the other daughters, texted Nathan's father, Clark, saying, "You know your son killed my father." However, that is when a neighbor of John's came forward claiming that they heard a gunshot around 2 a.m. But if it was 2 a.m., Nathan was believed to still be at his apartment complex. That call to John around 8:30 that night actually came in at 8:36 and was found to be a woman who called herself John's girlfriend. She said that John had tried to call her earlier that day and she was unable to pick up, so she was calling him back. She said that they were basically engaging in phone sex and that she was going to continue this conversation, but first Nathan was being let out of the house. She said that they talked for about 10 minutes before ending their conversation, talking about getaway plans to New York City. She was not considered a suspect at this time, but another strange element of this case was the fact that it was discovered that John's bookkeeper had also embezzled $416,000 from him over the years. This was a man named William D. Sadie, who was charged with larceny. However, detectives claimed that this was completely unrelated to his murder, and he was sentenced to 3.5 years. When lawyers asked what happened to all of that money that he stole, his lawyer just said it's part of the greater mystery of what happened to Mr. Cholakas. So of course investigators were looking deeper into the family, as this was a very wealthy family and the inheritance would just go down the line. So John had 4 daughters who were all grown at this time. The eldest was Elaine, the daughter who found him, then Charlene, then Nathan's mother Linda, and then Valerie. Back in 2013, Valerie was already pointing fingers at Nathan because Nathan had received about $550,000 from his grandfather's estate after he died. This was not held. This was immediately given to him for his college education and for beneficiary on death. And meanwhile, John Cholakas had a billboard with his photo and the words "Unsolved Murder" placed next to the highway. So 3 years later, Nathan was being served a search warrant in regards to the disappearance of his mother. And they stated that Nathan was capable of violence due to his past behavior, which we will get into, and investigators were looking for books, computers, documents, GPS devices, and maps that could help provide clues to the location of the chicken pox, as well as receipts for boat parts and receipts for the actual boat. But the warrant stated the investigation revealed that Nathan's boat was in need of mechanical repair, and that Nathan had been conducting a portion of these repairs on his own volition, which could have potentially rendered the boat unsafe for operation. But this was not the first search warrant that Nathan Carman had been served, because back in 2013, with the investigation of his grandpa, it took until 2014 for a search warrant to be filed against him in regards to his grandpa's murder. This was served for his apartment and his pickup truck. They were actually searching for firearms against a person posing a risk to self or others. And the reasons were listed as Nathan discarding a hard drive of his computer around the time of his grandfather's murder, as well as discarding a GPS from his truck that was used the morning of. He also was found to have kept his cell phone off during the drive from his apartment to Glastonbury the next day when he got lost before eventually locating his mother. But the main evidence in this case was a receipt showing that Nathan had purchased a high caliber rifle identical to the murder weapon for $2,100 in New Hampshire a month prior to the murder. When he was first asked about it, Nathan said that he only owned a shotgun, which was found in his home, because he was feeling unsafe at the time, but that had nothing to do with his grandfather. He denied ever buying a SIG rifle. Now, inside of his apartment, investigators did find a tactical shotgun, a rifle scope, a pellet gun, and boxes of ammo. But there were also notes written by Nathan detailing sniper rifles, self-propelled explosive devices. However, again, no Sig Sauer rifle was found. So while searching, a neighbor actually told detectives that Nathan was a time bomb waiting to go off. So Nathan was brought back to the police department for questioning, and he admitted that he shot guns at the shooting range and he owned a shotgun but no other weapons. When he was asked about the Sig Sauer rifle that he allegedly purchased, he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights. Investigators theorized that during the drive to visit his mother that early morning is when he disposed of that murder weapon. The gun has never been found. But a gun shop staff member at Shooter's Outpost claimed that it was Nathan who came in on November 11th, 2013, 5 weeks prior to the murder of his grandfather, to buy a gun using his ID. The staff member said that Nathan basically just wanted to use the gun for target shooting, but when he offered to actually have him purchase a different gun that would be better, Nathan said he had done his research and that was the one he wanted, the Sig Sauer. Now, while investigators could not find evidence that Nathan had this in his home, the caretaker of his grandfather's home, Joy Washburn, claimed that she had been shown Nathan's Sig Sauer rifle because John had purchased it for him, and they were all together in a room when John told Nathan to show Joy. While Joy was holding it, Nathan got upset that she was handling it for too long and told her to give it back. His motive was believed to be the immediate access of the hundreds of thousands of dollars that he would get after his grandfather's death. So for the murder of his grandfather, Nathan Carman had an arrest warrant drafted against him in 2014. However, this was denied and the judge demanded more evidence. So Nathan Carman was never arrested. He ended up moving to Vermont after several of his family members turned against him. Never his mother and his father, though, who loved their son dearly and did not believe he did this. But Nathan was said to use the money that he received from John's death to purchase a house and also the fishing boat, the Chicken Box, that his mother would disappear from 3 years later. Linda was said not to eat fish. She didn't love fishing. She only did this with her son to nurture their relationship. So now, 2 years after that first search warrant was given to Nathan, another search warrant was obtained for his home in Vermont in regards to the disappearance of his mother. At this time, it was this big old home, and they were able to seize an internet modem, a SIM card, and a letter written by Nathan. His mother Linda's home was also searched, and they seized several bags of evidence along with a computer and a jar filled with handwritten notes. Now, it was found that Linda and Clark Carman had actually gotten married and had their only child, Nathan James Carman, on January 21st of 1994. They divorced when he was young, and Nathan was mainly raised by his mother and then soon after his grandparents. You see, Nathan was actually the reason that Linda was speaking to her father again. They often had arguments when they were growing up. Linda was said to basically be the exact same as her father. She was hard-headed, she was stubborn, and she spoke out, and it was just like her father. And so John and Linda kind of butted heads, and they didn't always get along. So Linda kind of had an estranged relationship. However, when she got pregnant with Nathan, they did end up having a better relationship. John really wanted to be a part of Nathan's life. And so basically John took Linda, Clark, and Nathan and said, I will give you a monthly allowance and I will pay for you to live closer to me. So that is what they did. Now, he also promised them a Dunkin' Donuts franchise, but he didn't end up giving this to them in the end, and it was unknown why. This was around the time that Nathan was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which it was called then, and now it is just simply autism. He struggled at school, obviously very socially, and he was bullied for this. And while once close with his mom, his teenage years did begin to create distance. There were arguments often. Nathan was acting out, and it was said that around this time that a horse named Cruz that he was very close to and was his greatest friend had actually passed away, and this caused a lot of disrupt in his life. So back in 2011, a news article from their hometown read, "In Middletown, Connecticut, parents thankful runaway son is home again." This was actually about Nathan Carman. He was 17 at the time, and he was about to start school after summer break, but he then vanished, and his mother, Linda, did not believe that he could have run away with a friend because he didn't have any. So Nathan had last told her he was actually going to take a bike ride to go fishing, but he never returned home. The detectives on this case, they said that he might come off as extremely rude if anyone came up to him and to not touch him due to the fact that he was autistic, but that he was not violent. Now, he was spotted getting off a bus in New Haven, but no trace of him was found after that. Then, weeks later, in Stony Hill, Virginia, he was spotted outside of a store. When an officer arrived, he basically told them his name was Nathan and that his mom had kicked him out of the family home and he was headed to Florida. However, later, he admitted that he had lied to the officer and he was not kicked out of the house, he just ran away. He later told his dad that he had run away to get a job at a horse farm because that was the only place where he felt normal. But after this, at school, he began fighting with the teachers. He would yell his political opinions. If anyone disagreed with him, he would get very disruptive. He would be throwing his books. And he once actually called the vice president Satan and the secretary an agent of the devil. He brought a penknife to school, and it was alleged that he threatened another kid with it, but that was taken care of before anything actually happened. At this point is when he began to live in an RV outside of his mom's home. He was urinating in bottles. He was breaking things everywhere. He used a baseball bat and smashed everything. He never cleaned. He was said to have very unpredictable mood swings, and while his mother called for help, the police were unable to do anything. So unable to handle his rage, not knowing what to do with Nathan, his parents looked into a psychiatric hospital for treatment for him. However, his grandfather John did not agree with this. While they were trying to get him treatment, his grandfather was trying to get him out of that situation and basically take custody of him. Now, he wanted Nathan to move into a nearby home and go to work in his business, his grandfather's business. So this basically began to strain the relationship between Nathan and his mother, Linda, and also Linda and her father, John. Nathan had stopped taking his anti-anxiety medication, and he was experiencing alleged paranoid delusions and psychotic episodes. So his mother, who still had custody of him, entered him into a rehabilitation hospital, which had an autism center for research and treatment. This was actually following a rage where Nathan had thrown a tray of cookies that were fresh out of the oven against a wall because she had accidentally burned them. And he was also found to have put fish guts into Ziploc bags and handed those out for trick-or-treaters on Halloween. It was just very odd behavior. He was escalating in his anger, and so she placed him in this rehabilitation center, which was supposed to be helping him. But his grandfather did not agree with this once again, and so he was constantly going to see him, which was impeding on his therapy. Linda and Clark eventually sent Nathan to a behavioral boot camp in Idaho for 2 months. There's controversy around this onto whether this is helpful or abusive, but after the 2 months, they claimed that he was a bit better behaviorally. But FBI Special Agent Lisa Tudley believed that on top of Nathan's autism, he had undiagnosed schizophrenia and was in a very difficult place mentally. She also believed that he was having these religious delusions at this time. But when Nathan was officially 18, he moved in with his grandpa. Well, really moved into a home that his grandpa was funding. But he also started getting around $100,000 a year from John. And the only thing was he needed to be going to college and working a part-time job and also helping his grandfather with the business. But then John was murdered, and the fortune, while Nathan did get some, most of the fortune would be inherited by his 4 daughters, one of which being Nathan's mother, Linda, who was now missing. Only a few days after being rescued at sea, Nathan was filing for an $85,000 insurance policy due to his boat sinking. Now, while many began to point at the fact that, of course, Nathan could be wanting to get his mother Linda's inheritance, many did not know that Linda had actually taken him out of her will prior to this. Now, what many did not understand is why Nathan filed for $85,000. He was just a free man at this point. But now this insurance company was going to investigate the possibility that Nathan staged the sinking and killed his mom because they didn't want to have to pay him. So they were finding all of the evidence that they could find. They, of course, went through all of the police evidence. They also found that the path that the raft was located at did not match where the boat would have sank and where he would have just drifted out to sea. So at this point, the insurance company sued Nathan to deny this claim, claiming improper and unsafe repairs made the boat unseaworthy. So at the same time that Nathan was being sued by the insurance company in 2017, Linda Carson's sisters filed a Slayer petition to prevent Nathan from basically unlawfully causing a death and inheriting from the victim. So they alleged that Nathan killed both Linda and John for financial gain. And they said it wasn't about money, it was about justice. And they basically would use any of the money that Nathan didn't get into investigations into the death of their father and the disappearance of their sister. But in a statement made in 2018, Nathan said,
I have no idea who killed my grandfather. I know that I did not. I had nothing to do with my mother's death.
He then began to blame his aunts for the murder of John. Nathan's attorney claimed that there were other suspects besides Nathan that made more sense, including the mistress that John was talking to on the phone the night of his murder, that she could basically have motive and opportunity to kill her sugar daddy because she was aware of the amount of money that John just simply carried around and knew when he was home that night. But John's daughters said that Nathan was simply trying to smear their father's reputation and deflect against missing evidence, such as the gun, that Nathan still would not admit to ever having. In 2019, the insurance case then went to trial, and no one was allowed to speak about Nathan's grandfather's murder.
Firstly, we don't know what caused the boat to sink. Secondly, this isn't about money. It's an $85,000 claim. It's a contingency fee. I get a fraction of that if I win. I've put lots of time, effort, and frankly a lot of misery into this. It's about... I almost feel like I have a responsibility to my mom to make sure that the truth comes out. And Mr. Farrell and the insurers, Boat US, Berkshire Hathaway, National Fire and Liability, have made claims against me that are so tremendous, I don't feel like I can walk away from them. That's why I'm here. I'm not here about the money, and I just wanted to clarify that. That's all I have to say.
But experts testified that there was little chance that Nathan wouldn't have suffered hypothermia being on that raft for a week. Nathan then testified in his own defense that he had made alterations to this boat, removing the trim tabs, because it made the boat drag. It was also mentioned that he had replaced a pump days before the trip, and that Nathan did not know whether the pumps were pumping at the full rate of capacity until he saw that there was water filling in onto the boat below the deck. Nathan was testifying that he viewed his mother as more of a problem, more of a passenger than a fellow sailor. She didn't know anything about boats, and so when he saw this happening, he said that he just told her to go get the fishing line so he could figure it out because he didn't believe the boat was sinking. He said then suddenly the boat just dropped and he didn't hear his mother scream. And at this point he was asked, "Was your mother even on board?" And he said, "I told you yes, she was on board." When he was asked if she could talk at that point, he said, "I believe she could talk." Nathan said that he thought that his mother either hit her head or was dragged underwater by the equipment, but he was sticking to his story.
My concern, it's not the money. It's not so much even my freedom as it is my reputation. And seeing that I have a future.
And after 2 months, the insurance company actually won their trial on technicalities of the altercations that Nathan made to the boat. But their ruling did not have anything to do with murder. That was simply about the insurance. In fact, the judge stated outright that this ruling had zero to do with the larger issues surrounding Nathan Carman.
We've never doubted that Nathan Carman is intelligent and crafty. That he planned these murders carefully, and that's part of the challenge that the government faces in bringing the case against him. So the fact that he could invent some stories today is not surprising to us.
It was 6 years since his grandfather's murder and 3 years since his mother's disappearance, and no charges had been filed in either case. The family, well, most of them believed that Nathan was the killer, but investigators couldn't prove it, at least not yet. Investigators were rifling through all of the evidence that had been brought forward during the insurance case to find anything that could put Nathan behind bars. But his father, Clark, like I told you, he believed his son was innocent and that his grandfather would have given him anything that he ever wanted, so he had no motive. Clark said that Nathan probably loved his grandfather more than he even loved his father. However, 2019, the same year that the Slayer petition was thrown out and John's daughters lost, Nathan made a statement saying, "I want to be clear that the underlying allegations in my aunt's dismissed position that I murdered my grandpa and or mom are as false and meritless as my aunt's position on my grandfather's residence has been shown to be. I told the whole truth." But now, Nathan stood to inherit millions from his grandfather. 3 years later, with no answers, it was 2022 and an arrest was made. An 8-count indictment charged Nathan Carman with the murder of his mother on the high seas, along with fraud charges connected to a years-long plot to gain access to his family's money and later to defraud the company that insured the fishing boat. This stated, as a central part of this scheme, Nathan Carman murdered John Cholakas and Linda Carman. As part of his cover-up, Nathan Carman misrepresented his involvement in and responsibility for those deaths to law enforcement, to his family, to others who made inquiries about the death and their circumstances, and to others who challenged his cover-up or challenged his rights to his grandfather's assets. It was believed that after John's murder, he received approximately $550,000 and spent all of that money in 2 years. When his mother went missing, he was actually already low on funds, so it was theorized that he planned to kill his mother to get his mother's money as well. On May 10th of 2022, Nathan was arrested for first-degree murder. Nathan proclaimed his innocence. He insisted that the sinking was an accident, and he pleaded not guilty. His father, Clark, claimed that if anyone would survive prison, it was Nathan. He spent all of his time alone anyways. The prosecutors claimed that they had found a new motive for the murder of his grandfather. That Nathan had actually gotten straight F's on his report card that was sent out 2 days prior to his grandfather's murder, and it was theorized that John threatened to cut Nathan off if he flunked out of school. Now, a motion for pretrial release by Nathan's defense spoke of plenty of other suspects, including the grandfather's mistress. They said that John had actually visited this adult erotic store prior to his murder, and actually took this mistress to a casino where they engaged in a sexual relationship, likely for money. They went on to say that John was engaged in relations with this same mistress at his own home, and that she actually had a previous arrest on her record and was interviewed multiple times, though police had never named her as a suspect. Through further investigation, it was found that this was a 25-year-old blonde woman who was never named. She and John had met back in 2013 when she worked at a property management firm where John owned a large apartment complex. John had given her several items worth lots of money, and the weekend prior to his murder was when they took that trip to the casino, and she actually was given $3,500 for breast enhancement surgery. It was stated that this mistress knew that John kept his money in his house and often had lots of cash there. So it was theorized that that is why she murdered him in his home. However, none of that was brought up in the documentary that has just come out on Netflix. But on June 15th of 2023, 29-year-old Nathan was headed to trial when he was found dead in his cell. He was 4 months from trial when he had taken his own life by using his shoelaces for hanging. The criminal charges were subsequently dismissed. A note was found in his cell. However, this was not a suicide note. It was basically about things that he discussed with his attorney about the case on 2 prior occasions. Sergeant McKee stated that the police were hesitant to deem this investigation closed in the murder of his mother, but given the totality of the circumstances, this one should be closed. John's murder remains unsolved, but Windsor police say that it's still active. In 2023, Linda Carman was legally declared dead, and her sister Charlene has since spoken to the media talking about their father, John. She said she wants people to remember John for his kindness and his love. She said he'd give you a hard time, but he always did it out of love. As far as his murder, she believes that Nathan was actually angry at him for having an affair. That because he was cheating on Nathan's grandmother, Rita, before her death, that was a sin. And that he was also cheating with someone, that 25-year-old mistress, who was around Nathan's age. So Charlene believed that the motive was actually morality, not money. Now, this is also briefly touched on in the documentary, The Carmen Family Deaths, when it's spoken about Nathan's religious behaviors around this time and the fact that he sort of had this psychosis around religion. And it was also found that shortly after his grandfather's death, he and his mother had gone to a church, and Nathan was seen at the altar for 5 hours asking for forgiveness. But Charlene still said that Nathan should be remembered as a troubled soul. She was actually relieved to hear that Nathan was buried in the family plot next to his grandfather, saying that he needs to rest. It turned out that the youngest daughter, Valerie, had reached out to Nathan's father after his death, asking if he could be buried next to his grandfather, even though Valerie was one of the first people to say that Nathan killed John. So the book that I was talking about in the beginning, it was called Blood in the Water by Casey Sherman, and it described Nathan as both the victim and the villain in his own story. That Nathan Carman remains an enigma. In this book, Sherman pointed to the mistress of John, saying that he thinks that he saw a different side of the story. Sherman basically said to get away with murder is nearly impossible, but to get away with 2 is giving Nathan too much credit. Sherman dives into the mistress's alleged drug-dealing boyfriend and the fact that the sex toys that John purchased for his mistress were allegedly missing from the home following the murder. Now, the book also alleges that John had asked his caretaker, who was Joy Washburn, to marry him while Rita was still alive in order to change the trust. He even offered her $10,000 to marry him, and she told him she basically respected Rita too much to even hear that before she had passed. Joy then said at Rita's funeral, an associate of the family asked her to take John out hunting and kill him and make him look like an accident. Joy said she didn't believe that was a joke. Joy said that when she found out that John was actually dead, Valerie had called her and told her that John was just sick and being taken to the hospital. She was later told by the police that his other daughter found him dead. She thought this was very odd, and Joy said at John's funeral, Valerie actually came up to her and said that Nathan killed her father, but he would never be prosecuted for it. If anything, they would place him into a mental institution. And then she walked away. So some do point the finger at Valerie, saying that she was very odd during all of this. But Sherman also pointed out the fact that Linda and her father John had never gotten along. In fact, they fought more over Nathan than anything else. And while he was at the rehabilitation center, the two had actually gotten into a physical altercation, and Linda had been arrested. She screamed, "My father's worth $300 million and I want my share. He is not going to cut me off. I need the money." Linda's ex-husband, Clark, who was Nathan's father, said that the whole family argued like this and it was volatile. Linda believed that John wanted to take Nathan as his own son. So another theory was that possibly Linda had killed her father due to that fact, and that Nathan then killed her as revenge. There's so many odd factors, so many questions, and some people don't even believe that Nathan's death was by his own hand. They don't believe that he would have taken his life without getting justice for himself if he was innocent, or trying to prove that in court. So was this another possible suspicious death in the family? However, police found no evidence that it was suspicious, and neither did the jail. Now, the author, Casey Sherman, does not believe that even if Nathan had gone to court that he would have gotten a conviction for murder. Do you believe that there was enough evidence to convict him? And if Nathan's story of survival was a scam, what did he do for those 7 days when he was allegedly at sea before he was rescued? Do you believe that his mother was even in the boat when it sank? Had he already murdered her? Was this all the truth, that he just did what he could to survive and he couldn't also rescue his mother? Did he kill his grandfather 3 years prior? Were these two deaths interconnected? Did this all have to do with money? But the only thing that stands out about that to me is the fact that his grandfather did deeply love Nathan and seemed to give him anything he wanted, especially financially. So unless there is something that happened between the two of them, such as possibly Nathan flunking out of college and his grandfather having that rule set for him, that is, it's all alleged, that, you know, he had to be going to college to continue to get the allowance from his grandfather. Maybe that was some sort of motivator. Was it what Charlene was saying, that it was more about the fact that his grandfather was cheating on Rita prior to her death and then continued with this mistress afterwards? Was it something where Nathan was talked into this certain murder, or murders plural? And do you believe that his autism diagnosis had anything to do with this? I don't believe that, just in the same way we can't say autism makes somebody a killer, we can't say that autism also excludes them from being a killer. You know, I think that they are extremely smart, and while they are often honest, they do have the ability to be deceptive. He was known to have lied certain times, several different times, about different things. As far as the fact that he was saying that there was no violence in his childhood and there wasn't anything like that happening, there was a history of him being placed in these psychiatric facilities and possibly not getting the help that he needed. But it appeared as though at least from what I was reading, that his parents did try to do so, to give him the help that he needed. And whether it was a lack of help or whether it was just something that couldn't be helped, we don't really know. Do you believe there was something more going on than just the autism, such as schizophrenia, as the FBI special agent believes? There is a history of mental illness in the family. The grandfather, John's sister, actually, she suffered from mental illness. This is a case that I have seen so much conversation about because no one really knows what to even think of it. Little Polly girl in the back with a shoe. So I'm going to end it there. Please let me know what you think, and thank you so much for listening. Also, don't forget you can get 30% off Ana Luisa down below. Highly recommend. Don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.